Thorin's last hope was extinguished by the death of his guardian beast. Dylus collapsed on the beach, gasping for breath. He gave Thorin the rest of his talismans. Apply a drop of your blood to the talismans and they'll acknowledge you as their owner. Then use your inner energy to activate them. What about you? Thorin asked, taking the talismans. Dylus had consumed a few medicinal pills and managed to survive, but he didn't have much time left. The ancient bacteria on Phantasma Isle could invade his body through the burns on his skin. He left his body in a ball of his spiritual energy and took on the form of his original appearance. I have half an hour. After that, I'll disappear. Thorin cursed and clenched his fists. He hadn't known Dylus for long, but now that the salamander was dead, he was his only companion. The pillars of golden light absorbed the remaining shockwaves from the explosion. The ancient symbols separated from the light and fell from the sky. Don't let the symbols touch you, Tristan warned. The island's final array was activated when the light accumulated enough energy. All life forms will return to their origins. What does that mean? Did you lose control of the arrays? Stephen asked. It wasn't that hard to control them, but it's not possible now. The island is wiping itself clean and returning to its original state. The three of them stepped out of range. The salamander's flesh was the first test subject. When the symbols fell off its flesh, it turned black and faded into dust. No matter how powerful the beast was, the core of its origins was a speck of dust. The island's array was a thorough purification of all living things. Dylus didn't care about his life. He didn't have much time left. He rushed at Stephen, determined to kill him before he died. The ice dragon appeared beside Stephen. Its voice sounded in its mind. Get on my back. Thorin is planning to use his space-time techniques to make the symbols fall on you. The Phoenix is the faction's divine guardian beast. It won't be affected. Stephen, Tristan, and Zane mounted the ice dragon and flew behind the Phoenix. Dylus leaped after them, but the Phoenix was faster. It flapped its wings, whipping up a light breeze. The symbols drifted in the wind and fell over him. The shower of symbols was impossible to escape. He didn't have time to scream before he disintegrated into particles of light. Thorin swung his sword, unleashing waves of spatial fluctuations, but he couldn't stop the golden symbols from falling. Dylus's body and the talismans turned to dust. Just when Stephen, Tristan, and Zane were expecting Thorin to meet the same end, he crushed the jade pendant around his neck. His cultivation and his aura soared. Zane recognized the familiar yet terrifying feeling. He's trying to break through to the true immortal realm. Stephen peered over the ice dragon's back. The golden symbols were close to falling on Thorin. In here? What about the symbols? Back when I reached the true immortal realm, my body was temporarily immune to most external factors. Tempest Citadel killed me after my immunity wore off in the middle of the trial. Thorin will have the same immunity at the beginning. I heard the lightning strikes from the heavens during a trial. We're at the bottom of the ocean. Will the lightning reach this deep? Zane nodded. The trial is a test from the heavens. Nothing can get in their way. Breaking through to the true immortal realm had turned Thorin into a volcanic crater in the middle of an eruption. His energy was overflowing. With nowhere to go, it seeped out of his body and burned on his skin, releasing shockwaves across the island. The symbols were blown away. When the ice dragon dropped an artillery shell on Thorin, he snatched it from the air, and it exploded at point-blank range. His overflowing energy deflected the impact, and the explosion tore across the beach. The ground beneath his feet turned into a river of lava. He stood tall in the same spot, basking in a white light. A bolt of lightning crashed into the glass dome, enveloping the island in a blinding blue light. The whale's voice sounded in Stephen's mind. Lightning is striking the island. I don't know where it came from. I don't think I can get closer. Stay away from the island and hide. We'll find a way to break out. Thorin spread his arms with a smirk. If you want to die together, then feel free to attack me. I'll let you experience the terror of a heavenly trial. Stephen had no plans to get himself, Tristan, or Zane killed by needlessly interfering in his trial. The lightning from the heavens shattered the glass dome and struck the beach. The only active array left on the island was the golden pillars of light. Seawater surged through the opening like a waterfall. Stephen took out the metallic rectangular slab that Thierry had given him and transformed it into a barrier around himself, Tristan, and Zane. The ice dragon returned to its spiritual world, and they flew towards the opening in the glass dome. Most of the lightning was aimed at Thorin, leaving gaps at the edges. They slipped past the thunderous barrage of lightning and rushed into the whale's stomach. When they reached the surface, Stephen could see a faint glimmer of light at the bottom of the ocean. If Thorin passes his trial, he'll ascend to a higher plane. I'll have to be even harder to deal with him in the future. Think about it this way, Zane said. There are 2 outcomes. 1, the heavens will recognize him as a threat and kill him with lightning. 2, he passes his trial, but he'll leave the human realm forever, and you won't have to worry about him anymore. While they were engaged in a life-or-death battle at the bottom of the sea, Cadus's crisis had worsened. Hashan and his martial artists were assassinating the people closest to Stephen. They discovered 2 of the Leviathan unit's hidden strongholds and killed 17 of their captains. Liam had been appointed the temporary commander again. At this time, he was in the palace's courtyard, discussing the recent situation with the Leviathan unit. We have too many casualties. How are we going to explain this to Mr. Adams when he comes back? We shouldn't have to let the Sovereign go out and fight, one of the Leviathan unit members said. What if we lured our enemy away from him and the surface for an opportunity to attack us? We can't even capture them alive and interrogate them. They'll kill themselves with poison once we drive them into a corner. Their dilemma was interrupted when the ice dragon landed in the garden. Everyone was glad to see Stephen, Tristan, and Zane alive. Stephen had noticed several places burning across the country while the ice dragon was flying to the palace. The Leviathan unit was likely having a hard time dealing with the enemy on the surface. Liam reported the heavy casualties that had occurred during the short time they were away with a guilty expression. How do we lose so many captains? The culprits are attacking from the shadows, and they have intel on the Leviathan unit's strongholds. Round up all of our people at the garrison near the palace. With this many martial artists gathered together, they'll have to think twice before attacking us again. After Liam left to make the arrangements, Javon respectfully led his ministers to the entrance of the courtyard to wait for Stephen. The entire country was in chaos, and no one knew when peace would be restored. Javon wasn't making much progress by implementing ordinary methods, so his only option was to rely on Stephen to use force and resolve the crisis directly. Our country's closed off from the rest of the world, and the volume of foreign trade has dropped drastically. Do you have any ideas, Mr. Adams? To eradicate the enemy, they needed to lure them out of hiding, but regular martial artists wouldn't be able to handle them. Stephen decided to rely on the beasts. The threadworms appeared in their human forms and condensed a pile of iron sand. Tell everyone to put some sand in their pockets before they leave. It'll be easier to track them down if they encounter the culprits. Hashan's martial artists were hiding in a slum between attacks. They informed him that they'd killed off most of the Leviathan unit captains stationed in Cadus and that the Sovereign had returned to the palace. Hashan was a little nervous when he heard that Stephen was back. What was Thorin and Dylas doing? Were they killed in battle? It had been some time since he'd heard from them. He couldn't keep charging through the front lines if they weren't there to back him up. Cadus's military had been sent back by recent assassinations. This was an opportunity for the island state to offer their protection in exchange for reopening their port. Hashan switched gears and informed the director of the island state's finance department of his plan. The director reluctantly boarded his private jet to make a trip to Cadus. Liam had arranged for construction teams to begin rebuilding around the ruined factories and warehouses on the mountain. Stephen went for an inspection with the ministers. He noticed that the construction workers were planning to move the factories and warehouses underground for a more secure location. It was useful against firepower, but the same couldn't be said when skilled martial artists were involved. How long will the construction take? Around 2 months, the person in charge of the construction site replied. Will there be fortresses set up nearby? No, that wasn't specified in the blueprints. The defensive facilities will be built after the factories and warehouses are renovated, Liam explained in a low voice. They're not included in the blueprints because information can be leaked. A minister from the palace came over and reported that a delegation team from the island state was here to negotiate. They're saying that Cadus's military isn't up to par and can't protect their own country, so they want to send troops to help out. Sounds to me like they're looking down on the United States' military. We're not that far from Cadus. What makes them think that Cadus needs their protection? The minister wisely stayed quiet. He could sense Stephen's anger and didn't want to ruffle his feathers. Everyone went back to the palace, and the big shots took their seat for a round of negotiations. The king, Javon, became a bystander as Stephen took over his conversation with the financial director from the island state. Our interests are the same as yours, Mr. Adams, the financial director said. We hope to restore peace to Cadus and improve the economy. We'll only be sending our troops temporarily. When the crisis is resolved, they'll return to the island state. Stephen had already guessed the director's intentions. The island state was interested in Cadus because of the geographical advantage. Once they were given access to Cadus, they wouldn't be leaving until they were given access to the port. Javon was quietly sitting at the head of the table. His territory would either go to the U.S. or the island state. He had no say in the matter. I agree with your line of thinking. However, the troops you send must be experienced martial artists. I've heard a lot about the island state's ancient faction. I hope you can send martial artists of their level to Cadus. Stephen's answer stunned everyone in the room. Why was he letting enemies into Cadis's territory so easily? The financial director agreed without hesitation. Hashan's martial artists have been killing off personnel from the U.S. and Cadis ever since they sneaked into the country. He didn't expect the sovereign to give them legal entry so soon. I hope our collaboration isn't limited to military affairs. I'd like to open up the port in Cadis to facilitate a more convenient trading route between the island state and other countries. That will depend on your decision. Discussions between the U.S., Warhawk, and Maplewood regarding Cadis's port haven't been going that smoothly. Stephen's bold implications made the director hesitate. He was only responsible for financial matters in the island state. He couldn't make such an important decision on his own. The island state had a closer relationship with Warhawk and Maplewood than the U.S. According to Stephen's proposal, if the island state wanted access to Cadis's port, their trade with Warhawk and Maplewood would be limited as they haven't reached an agreement with the U.S. yet. The director left the conversation at that, and Stephen put forward a new request. He wanted to personally assess the island state's martial artists. Ever since the martial arts competition ended, the Leviathan unit had been secretly investigating them, but it would be easier to obtain information if they were openly instead of sneaking around. If you're interested, I'll make arrangements and inform them of your arrival, the director said. I had a glimpse of the martial arts during the competition. I'd like to see what they're capable of. I hope you don't try to hide anything from us. After all, Cadis's safety is on the line. The director laughed. We wouldn't do that. Cadis is an important country to both the U.S. and the island state. The rest of the discussion went smoothly. Stephen wasn't in the mood to attend the welcoming banquet Javon had prepared. He excused himself and left with Liam. When they were out of earshot, Liam expressed his confusion. Cadis was in chaos. Where would they find the time to visit the island state? We don't know who Thorin's allies are. Based on their skill in assassinations, I have a hunch the culprits are martial artists from the island state. After our negotiation, the island state will be given permission to openly send their martial artists to Cadis. If the attacks stop, that will prove that they were the culprits. If the attacks continue and extend to the island state's martial artists, then the financial director will help us find the true culprits. Either scenario will save us a lot of time and effort. The island state's officials received notice of the negotiations at the same time as Hashan. His martial artists had been searching for Thorin and Dylas, but they seemed to have vanished into thin air. We should prepare for the worst. They were most likely killed by the sovereign, Hashan's subordinate said. Hashan doubted Thorin was killed. If anything, he'd sustained a minor injury and was hiding to recover. Thorin was suppressing his cultivation. He's at the true immortal realm, and he also has a divine guardian beast by his side. How could he be killed so easily? What happened to him isn't important. The sovereign wants us to observe our martial artists' daily training. How's that any different from openly spying on us? We can't reject his request. This was decided after a diplomatic discussion between our two countries. Maybe we can use this opportunity and show the sovereign our strength and make him cooperate with us. The U.S. military escorted Stephen and Liam to the island state. Defense rows of warships were stationed at the port. If Stephen hadn't informed the officials that he'd be coming, the warships wouldn't hesitate to attack. Hashan was waiting for him and a group of executives from the island state's military. Friendly smiles plastered on their faces, but they didn't meet their eyes. Welcome to the island state, Mr. Adams. It's an honor to meet you. The pleasure is mine. I've heard a lot about your martial artists. I'm sure I can learn a thing or two from them. Hashan chuckled. Everyone knows that the Leviathan unit is under your command. They're one of the strongest organizations in the world. My people pale in comparison. Unfortunately, many Leviathan unit members have been killed recently. We're searching for the culprits. The atmosphere turned heavy, but Hashan's expression gave nothing away. He was a cunning man. A few words from the sovereign couldn't shake him. Hashan brought Stephen and Liam to a private beach in the south. It was his private property and also a training ground for his martial artists. His faction frequently took on mercenary jobs overseas. There was a large swimming pool with piranhas in the training facility. Hashan's martial artists trained by stepping on the water's surface and sparring with one another. Stephen watched their fists collide as after-images phased across the water. He noticed that the piranhas in the water weren't bothered by the martial arts movements on the surface. Their footsteps were as light as rain. Ordinary martial artists hid their aura, but Hashan's martial artists released their aura and adjusted their frequency to the same tune as the environment. They called it assimilation. You live up to your reputation, Stephen praised. They're even more skilled than the group who participated in the martial arts competition. They've camouflaged their aura with the surrounding environment. If they weren't in my field of vision, I wouldn't have known they were there. Their techniques aren't that special. They're just good at hiding their tracks, Hashan said modestly. The staff prepared delicacies and fine wine for Stephen and Liam in the lounge for maximum comfort as they watched the martial artists train. Stephen didn't have much of an appetite, but he tasted every dish as a formality. The island state's military executives raised their glasses for a toast. Mr. Adams, what do you think about our joint security operation in Cadis? Our duty is to assist Cadis in enhancing their security. The authority has to remain with the royal family. Aside from that, there should be restrictions on advanced weapons and equipment brought into the country. The royal family has these supplies in their inventory, and their military factories are operating continuously to meet the demand. That saves costs for both of our countries. The military executives were led by Stephen's nose. They weren't aware of it, but they'd lost their initiative from the 2 agreements alone. Many Leviathan unit members had entered Cadis's upper management. Even Kim held a position. As for weapons and equipment, most of them were produced by factories owned by the U.S. Hashan didn't comment. He was deliberating his original plan to get rid of the sovereign, ruin the U.S., and take over their territory. It'd be much more efficient than waiting for the island state to expand its commercial collaboration with the U.S. An LCD screen hung from the ceiling. It displayed the other training halls in the building to give Stephen a complete understanding of their martial arts. Mr. Adams, your subordinate must be quite skilled to be by your side. Are you interested in letting him spar with my martial artists? Action is more entertaining than watching, don't you think? That's a good idea, Stephen said with a smile. He patted Liam's shoulder and transmitted his voice to his mind. Take it easy. Don't reveal all your techniques. When the time is right, lose the match to make them lower their guard. They're up to something, but they won't take action if they think we can deal with us. Wouldn't that affect our country's reputation? It's not a big deal. If worst comes to worst, we'll silence them. Unbeknownst to Stephen and Hashan, both of them were thinking about getting rid of each other. By the end of their meeting, only one of them would be left standing. There was an arena constructed from stainless steel next to the swimming pool. Liam jumped into the ring. A martial artist appeared from a whirlpool on the steel floor. Stephen didn't recognize him, nor did he notice when he sneaked in. On closer inspection, he wasn't the only one. There were quite a few unfamiliar faces who'd joined the crowd at some point. The martial artist in the arena extended a hand, inviting Liam to make the first move. He was the sovereign's subordinate and a guest in the island state. He had to be treated at the highest level of hospitality. Liam respectfully took his opponent up on his offer. He didn't feel any pressure. He would admit defeat when the time is right. Liam condensed dragons made of water from the pool next to him. Piranhas were mixed into the water and flowing through their bodies. When the dragons dove for the martial artist, he waved his hand and froze them into pillars of ice. They shattered into fragments and shot toward Liam. He deflected the projectiles with his blade. His balance wavered with every collision. The martial artist lifted his hand with a smirk, and the shards of ice clattered to the floor. It's boring if you don't go all out. Everyone has high expectations of the sovereign's subordinate. Don't let them down. Wasting your chance to attack is dangerous in battle, Liam retorted. Didn't anyone ever teach you that? Liam gathered the aura in his blade and condensed a towering tree. It resembled the divine Meru tree from the Asura realm. Whenever he was up against enemies he couldn't defeat, he would remember their techniques and make improvements to his own. The tree's root extended across the arena in seconds. The martial artist slashed at the trunk, but he only succeeded in shaking the tree. The leaves that fell turned into sharp projectiles, forcing him to dash in the air to avoid them. Liam leaped onto a branch and watched his opponent run around. If the leaves so much as grazed the martial artist, seeds would take root in his body, absorb his blood, and invade his organs. Stop running and surrender. It'll save you a lot of pain. Liam's provocation riled him up. The martial artist's figure blurred, and he vanished from the air. Liam sensed his aura surge around him, but he couldn't pinpoint his exact location. Before he could react, the martial artist's sword impaled him in the chest. The military executive's eyes widened in horror. The collaboration between the two countries would be over if the sovereign's subordinate was killed in a spar. To their surprise and their relief, Liam calmly grabbed the sword and pulled it out. A cluster of wooden totems hidden among the leaves shattered into splinters. He couldn't see the martial artist in front of him, but he knew he was there. He could feel his grip on the other end of the sword. The branches sharpened into spears and struck in the direction of the martial artist's sword. He finally appeared, looking worse than before. The branches had tunneled straight through his body. Blood stained the wood. It seemed this was Liam's definition of taking it easy. Stephen gave Hashan an apologetic smile. I'm afraid casualties are unavoidable in a spar between martial artists. I hope you don't mind. No need to feel guilty, Hashan said, gesturing to the arena. The winner hasn't been decided yet. The skin around the martial artist's wounds melted, and his flesh and blood stuck to the branches. In only a few seconds, his body dissolved into a sticky fluid that flowed down the tree. Liam was disgusted, but also wary. He didn't know what technique this was, but he couldn't feel the martial artist's aura anymore. He decided this would be a good time to leave the ring. Just as he was about to jump out of the arena, the martial artist's face protruded from the trunk. Where are you going? Our spar isn't finished. I've never seen this manifestation before. Let me test it out. Liam leaped back as the branches swept past him. He'd lost his spiritual connection with his manifestation. Hashan's martial artist had somehow assimilated himself into the tree and made it his own creation. Another wave of branches swept towards Liam, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. The space in the arena was limited, and there wasn't much room to dodge. When he sliced the branches in half, the ends regrew almost instantly. The cycle was endless. Every fallen branch took root and germinated into a strong and healthy sapling. Hashan flashed a triumphant smile at Stephen. The battle is ever-changing. Aren't you worried about your subordinate? My martial artist has the upper hand. There's nowhere for him to run. It's just a spar. If this was a real battlefield, the winner and loser wouldn't be as clear-cut. Stephen pretended to sound disappointed. At the same time, he transmitted his voice to Liam, telling him he could stop if he wanted to. Liam let the branches hit his arm and fling him into the open space outside the arena. He hadn't sustained any injuries, but it was his loss because he'd left the ring. The military executives at the table breathed a sigh of relief. The sovereign's subordinate had gotten away with a few bruises at most. The relationship between the U.S. and the island state was still intact. The tree scattered into particles of light, leaving behind a mess of craters on the floor of the arena. Hashan's martial artist thanked Liam for the spar and disappeared into thin air. Hashan had reserved a room for Stephen and Liam at a hotel near the sea. He led them to the room after the spar. As the sun set over the horizon, a cool breeze drifted into the hotel room, carrying the scent of the ocean. The threadworms transformed into miniature clones of themselves and burrowed into inconspicuous corners of the wall and soil to monitor the training ground. Liam leaned against the wall and looked out the window at the lights over the ocean. They were from the United States' warships. They were stationed there as a threat to the island state. If anything happened to the sovereign, a few rounds of firepower would annihilate the coastal city. Do you think Hashan's brave enough to assimilate in the middle of the night? Maybe. He's only hesitating because he hasn't heard back from Thorin and his companion. His martial artists hold influential positions in the country. Many of them are executives of leading enterprises, and some of them are even in politics. As their leader, Hashan's influence is on par with the ruler of the island state's regime. To establish his position, he'll need to improve the economy by taking over Cadis's port and decreasing the costs of trade. Stephen was willing to wait a few days for Hashan to make a move. After he settled the negotiations with the financial director, there were no more mysterious assassinations. That proved that Thorin's allies were Hashan's martial artists, and they were the culprits behind the recent deaths. After sending the military executives away, Hashan holed up in his room at the training ground to think. Politicians have to prioritize economic interests, his subordinate advised. Money creates stability. Are you suggesting we assassinate the sovereign tonight? If we do it right and kill him without leaving evidence behind, the relationship between the U.S. and the island state will plummet. Warhawk and Maplewood won't pass up the chance to get involved. Who knows? Maybe they'll threaten the U.S. borders again. While they're preoccupied, we'll take over Cadis and reap its benefits for ourselves. Hashan's subordinates were persuasive. He made up his mind to take action tonight. One of the threadworm's clones was curled up beneath a leaf of the houseplant in the room. It heard the entire conversation and reported the details to Stephen. Hashan has made his decision. Liam, stay in the room and fend off anyone who comes for you. Try to buy as much time as possible. I'll go find him at the training ground and settle this. Stephen was taking a huge risk. Liam opened his mouth to protest, but he didn't know what to say. They'd come to the island state alone, and if they swapped roles, he couldn't guarantee he had what it takes to deal with Hashan. Stephen changed out of his uniform and into a black outfit. He left the hotel through the balcony at the same time Hashan's martial artist sneaked in. The threadworms guided him to Hashan's room at the training ground. He gathered the Killen's aura at his fingertips and lightly tapped the lock on the door. It melted and dripped over the carpet floor. Hashan heard the door creak open and sensed an intruder in his room. Who's there? Stephen pressed the light switch and revealed himself. No need to be nervous. I'm just here to return the favor. What do you mean? You, our martial artists, are at the hotel. How would you like to explain that? Hashan dropped all pretenses. As the leader of his own martial arts faction, he was confident in his strength. Since Stephen was here, he might as well just finish him off. Hashan closed the distance in a split second and went in for the kill. Stephen blocked with a casual swing of his sword to the right. The fight broke out in silence. The threadworm's clones lined the inner wall of the room and set up an array to contain the sound and energy fluctuations. Ever since Stephen's sword was upgraded, the ghost fire helped him out in battle by predicting his opponent's moves and gave him suggestions on how to counterattack. With the ghost fire inside his sword, he could let go and it would attack on its own. Your swordsmanship is impressive, Hashan said in surprise. Are you using your spiritual energy to control your sword? This is a high-level technique. You can believe what you want. The details won't matter when you're dead. You came here by yourself. Do you really think you're getting out alive? To avoid Stephen's accurate aim and prediction, Hashan faded into his surroundings and disappeared. Stephen casted his domain of hellfire. It could sense his opponent and absorb their inner energy. Hashan's location was revealed when the flames burned around him. Stephen lowered the temperature in the room to a freezing point using the ice dragon's spiritual energy. You can hide, but there's nowhere to run. Hashan targeted the windows of the door, but the sword rebounded with every strike. The threadworms had used their iron sand to seal all openings of the room. Hashan was focused to show himself and fight face to face. Stephen was only provoking him to get him to stop hiding. When he appeared, Stephen threw the dart he'd taken from Dr. Dalton's old research institute at the back of his head. Hashan's mind went blank, and he lost consciousness. This was the first time the dart had been used. Stephen hoped nothing unexpected would happen. He waited a few minutes. When Hashan didn't move, he crouched next to him and checked his condition. His body temperature, heartbeat, and pulse were normal. His pupils weren't dilated, and there was no sign of bleeding from the wound on the back of his head. The incision between the dagger and the skull was perfect. Sometime later, Hashan's eyes fluttered open. He slowly got to his feet and respectfully walked up to Stephen. Mr. Adams, your orders are my command. Show me a list of your martial artists. Hashan turned on his laptop and showed Stephen the profiles on the screen. The information included the martial artist's name, age, gender, and other basic details. It also recorded their cultivation and their proficiency in specific weapons. Tomorrow, tell your martial artist hiding in Cadis to report to the government and wait for further orders. Stay in the island state and continue to establish your position in the upper management. I'll help your faction improve its reputation. It'll be useful when you're running for election. Hashan didn't argue. He nodded and readily agreed. At the hotel, a more action-packed battle was taking place. Hashan's martial artists used the dark environment to their advantage and targeted Liam's blind spots. His totems blocked every attack for him. Neither side used any flashy moves to avoid drawing attention. The hotel was close to the ocean. If there was an explosion, the U.S. fleet would notice and take action. In the midst of an intense fight, Hashan relayed a new order. Confusion flickered in the martial arts expressions before they jumped out the window and fled. Liam turned to the clone he'd created using his wooden totems. Its appearance and aura were identical to Stephen's. Liam's mind raced with questions. Why did the martial artists leave so suddenly when they had the upper hand? Did Stephen and Hashan's confrontation cause too much of a commotion? He stared up at Stephen's clone like it had all the answers. The clone stared back blankly. Liam broke the staring contest and went to the window. He looked in the direction of the training ground, hoping that nothing had happened to Stephen. To his relief, Stephen walked in the door 15 minutes later and gave him an update. When Hashan's martial artists go to Cadis, I'll ask Dr. Dalton to implant AI chips in their brains. Doesn't his faction make up most of the island state's combat strength? Liam asked. That's right. The regular armed forces don't contribute much. Their thermal weapons aren't as advanced as ours. Hashan's martial artists had killed a large number of the Leviathan unit members. Nothing could atone for their crimes. They would pay with their loyalty to the U.S. Let's head back tomorrow, Stephen said. I'm on the verge of breaking through to the true immortal realm, and I need to cultivate to make it happen. How's your cultivation coming along? I'm at the initial stage of the immortal realm, but there's a long way to go before I reach your level. You still have time. The more progress, the better, but don't push yourself. Ever since the Leviathan unit's leader took Liam under his wing, there'd been very few tasks and opponents he couldn't handle. Stephen's request to participate in the Mystic Covenant's recruitment was one of the hardest challenges he'd ever been given. I'll do what I can. The next morning, Stephen paid the military executives a visit and said his goodbyes. His trip to the island state was casual and sudden. They couldn't figure out why he'd come all the way here just to observe Hashan's martial artists for a day before leaving. But they didn't dwell on the details. Hashan's martial artists had been given permission to enter Cadis as guards. It wouldn't take long for the island state's economy to prosper again. As soon as the private jet landed at the training ground on the outskirts of Annapolis, Stephen and Liam went their separate ways. Stephen had reached the stage where he didn't need any more physical training. His priority was the internal world he'd created. Flowers, trees, birds, insects, and fish had been born. The laws of nature resembled the laws in reality. The deeper his understanding of the laws, the more accurate they would be in his internal world. Stephen entered his internal world with his consciousness and flew to the dense forest. Ancient humans were using simple stone weapons to hunt for food. He pointed at a tree nearby, and a bolt of lightning came down from the sky. The forest burst into flames. The The ancient humans were so scared that they abandoned their prey and hid behind the rocks. After some time, some of them gathered their courage and approached the flames. They were drawn to the warmth and waved their companions over. Stephen spoke into their minds, teaching them how to use fire. They heard his voice, but they didn't see his physical body. To them, he was a mysterious god who'd bestowed them with fire. With his help, the ancient humans developed quickly. They established a primitive village and created advanced weapons from stone. He used his spiritual energy to inscribe the alphabet on stone slabs and carved patterns to help them remember. As the days passed, Stephen switched back and forth between the real world and his internal world to develop his speech as much as possible. He and Liam were in separate rooms below the training ground to make the most of their limited time. The Leviathan unit's leader rushed back from the southwestern border to train his student. He was busy with military affairs, but nothing could be more important than Liam's life. He was concerned about him, but participating in the Mystic Covenant's recruitment was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Most of the cultivators in the Elysian realm have surpassed the level of ascension. Don't stray too far from Mr. Adams, and don't rush into battle blindly. Your opponents will be stronger than you. No matter what happens, you have to come home safely. Liam acknowledged his teacher's warning. His task was to help Stephen while keeping a low profile to avoid making enemies. Stephen's routine continued, and his cultivation steadily progressed until he finally reached the threshold. Tristan and Zane hurried over to oversee his heavenly trial. Everyone in the training ground except Liam evacuated to prevent needless injuries. Tristan and Zane set up an array used to recover injuries. It wasn't an ordinary defensive array. The purpose of the heavenly trial was to test the ascender. The more resistance from internal factors there were, the more intense the lightning would be. Without the array, Stephen would be reduced to ashes. Stephen picked out the strongest leather armor he had, including wrist guards and boots from Phantasma Isle's vaults. The preparations did nothing to calm his nerves. The heavenly trial is a test of endurance, Zane explained. It's like throwing ore into a furnace to burn and forge. As your body is constantly destroyed and reborn, it'll become stronger. But there's also a risk of failing to withstand the lightning. When that happens, you'll turn into ashes. Are you trying to give me advice or make me more nervous? Zane shrugged. I'm just giving you the facts so you know what to expect. Stephen sighed and steeled his nerves. It was now or never. He began to gather his power to break through the threshold. His energy condensed into a raging flame on his skin. The clear sky darkened with storm clouds, and thunder rumbled overhead. Lightning flashed and fell from the sky. Stephen condensed a barrier to block the lightning. The collision rattled the training ground and shook the earth. His hellfire had the ability to absorb energy, but a few strikes of lightning extinguished the blue flames. His defensive armor didn't last long either. The violent force tore his uniform, and pieces of fabric littered the ground. The lightning tore through his body like a knife. The only thing he could do was mend the wounds to repair the damage as best he could. Tristan and Zane activated the array as Stephen's life force weakened. The overflowing energy on his skin formed a protective barrier, but it wouldn't last for long. How long is this trial? It's different for every cultivator, Zane said. It depends on their physique and how long it takes to strengthen their body. Think of it as a divine training with a high risk of death. How is that supposed to help me? Stephen asked through clenched teeth. I'm reaching my limit. Stephen's surroundings had started to blur. Stars filled his vision, and he couldn't see Tristan and Zane clearly anymore. If this continued, his body would break. He took a risk and tried to absorb the lightning with the slits of his palm. When energy flowed inside him, he let it circulate through his meridians. His body turned transparent, and he was enveloped in a faint blue light. The influx of power spread to Stephen's internal world. Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed, and a storm swept the land. Flowers and trees grew at a rapid rate. Both destruction and vitality were contained in the energy. Tristan and Zane assessed Stephen's condition. He'd reached a balance between destruction and restoration. There was a high chance that he'd pass his trial. Aren't the heavenly trials supposed to be harder than this? Back when I reached this stage, I was struck by lightning until my body was mangled. But the only thing that happened to him is a torn uniform and a few broken weapons. Zane's mood fell as he remembered the past. If it weren't for Tempest Citadel, he would have ascended to a higher plane and started a new life. Tristan had witnessed the trials of many ascenders, but absorbing lightning was a first. Ancient martial arts factions usually had high-ranking cultivation manuals to help their members ascend. The heavenly trial was only a test. There were no restrictions outside the rules the heavens imposed. During their trial, ascenders were allowed to use techniques they'd learned from cultivation manuals that originated in a higher plane. I've never seen anyone pass their tests so easily. He's absorbed so much lightning that he looks like a glowing light bulb. I don't think he plans to stop anytime soon. His technique turns anything he absorbs into a void. Even lightning from the heavens is nothing to him. We just need to infuse our energy into the array to help him maintain his physical state. He'll take care of the rest. As the hours passed, the lightning gradually lessened, and the storm clouds overhead disappeared without a trace. Liam was the first to rush over to Stephen in excitement. He could sense that his body had been tempered and strengthened to an existence close to a god. This might not be much of an achievement to the Ascenders in the Elysian realm, but it was an incredible feat in the human realm. Stephen had finally become an Ascender, but the sudden breakthrough made him feel a little lost. He didn't know what to do next. His body felt lighter, and he could barely feel the pull of gravity. Tristan and Zane came over to congratulate him and point out the black hole that had opened up in the sky. It was similar to the spatial rift that had opened at the northern border a while back. "You're not a full-fledged Ascender until you reach a higher realm," Tristan said. "Now that you've overcome your trial, this world will repel you and try to kick you out. If you don't cross over, it'll drag you away at some point." Stephen's limited time had become even more limited. He wasn't ready to say goodbye to his family, his friends, or the human realm. "Can I come back?" "That will depend on your cultivation. The Asuras were restricted by the human realm's barrier. That's why they found the exorcist to break the silver netting. The stronger you become, the harder it'll be for you to come back. But when there's a will, there's a way. Take my teacher, for example. You don't have his ability to cross realms, but I'm pretty sure he's not the only one who can freely travel between a higher plane and a lower one." The black hole descended from the sky in a swirl of stars and the galaxy above Stephen's head. It reminded him that he didn't have much time left. "Liam, I have some things to take care of before we go to the Elysian realm. Keep training and I'll come to you when I'm ready." Understood. Tristan and Zane followed Liam back to the training ground to help him improve his cultivation as much as possible. Stephen went home to find Kim. Tears welled in her eyes when she heard he would be leaving soon. Not just anyone could cross realms. If he left, she might never see him again. Stephen pulled her into a hug. "I've thought it through, Kim. The Leviathan unit is going to train you into a martial artist. I've already asked him, and he's agreed to be your teacher. Liam will be your fellow student." Kim pulled away, bewildered and confused. She'd never cultivated a day in her life. "What are you talking about?" "You don't need to reach a higher cultivation to strengthen your body and extend your life. The Leviathan unit's leader told me about a technique that can create clones. When the time comes, I'll bring you with me. In the meantime, I'm going to find a way to travel between realms, so when we can come back to see our daughter, family, and friends whenever we want." With a new goal in life, Kim was filled with motivation. She was determined to become a martial artist. Stephen left a few top-grade weapons and cultivation items for protection and asked the Flood Dragon to be her bodyguard while he was away. After finalizing his arrangements, Stephen ascended to the Elysian realm with Liam. The black hole disappeared when he set foot in a higher plane. His aura was now similar to most of the cultivators in the realm. Liam was the only stowaway. Minori City was livelier than the last time Stephen was here. The Mystic Covenant's recruitment was just around the corner. Most cultivators were training in the quiet wilderness, but to prepare for the competition, they had to enter the city to purchase resources. Stephen took Liam to the Dragon Clan's castle to visit the Prophet. "It's dangerous work to walk around with no status. I'm going to ask the Prophet if he can give you a title." "Will he agree? He sounds like a big deal." "Probably. If he's interested in the incentives, there's no reason for him to refuse." They found the Prophet in his study, reading an ancient text. Stephen greeted him respectfully and introduced Liam. "I've ascended to the Elysian realm and brought my companion with me. This is Liam. He'll be helping me during the recruitment." The Prophet's gaze swept over Liam. "He's more like a burden than a helper. He's slightly weaker than you before you ascended." 10,001 invitations means I have 10,000 competitors. With Liam around, I have one less competitor. He may not be an ascender, but he's a talented cultivator. If it's possible, please give him a title." It took minimal convincing for the prophet to name Liam as his second student. He couldn't predict everything that happened in the future, but he did know that Stephen's chances of surviving the recruitment increased with Liam around. Kagan and his companions were cultivating near the castle to prepare for the recruitment. If they were selected to join the expeditionary team, they could use their authority and pass judgment on the human realm. "You should be careful," the prophet warned. "The Asura King trained them personally. His strength and talent far surpasses yours." "I'll keep that in mind. Conflict is allowed outside the city. I'll test them before the recruitment begins." In the evening, Stephen and Liam went to check out the Asura's camp. They'd constructed buildings similar to their tribes back in the Asura realm. Some of the Asuras were on patrol. Kagan and his strongest subordinates were meditating in their respective rooms. "If the Asuras are sending their chief to the recruitment, that means they're determined to join the expeditionary team," Stephen said. The Ice Dragon's voice sounded in his mind. "What's there to worry about? Let's just kill off his followers." Stephen had the prophet's support, which was equivalent to having the entire dragon clan as his backer, but he didn't want to involve them in his conflict with the Asuras. "We can't kill all of them. We'll choose a few as a test. I still need to get used to my new body." Stephen sneaked toward the entrance. He hid his aura and covered his tracks using the shadows from the forest. When a group of Asuras on patrol passed by, Stephen targeted the straggler in the back. His hand tightened around the Asura's neck and drained the energy from his body in under a minute. He did the same with the rest of the members on patrol. When their energy surged inside him, it was like a small stream flowing into a vast ocean. It didn't have much of an effect. Kagan was alarmed when he lost his mental connection with the Asuras on patrol. He left the building and instructed the others to search the premises. They found a group of shriveled bodies near the forest and suspected that someone here stole their invitations. None of them suspected Stephen. The Asuras had been searching for him for the past few days, but there was no trace of him, so they stayed in the forest to focus on their cultivation. This wasn't the Asura realm. Kagan wasn't confident he could fend off an Ascender. Even so, he reached the area with his subordinates to look for the culprit. When they couldn't find a lead, he told everyone to return to camp and activate the defensive array. They had a limited number of invitations. They couldn't risk having them stolen. Stephen gathered the Ice Dragon's spiritual energy and sprinkled snow in the air. In the blink of an eye, the buildings were frozen into ice sculptures. Even some of the Asuras were encased in ice. Kagan unsheathed his sword and faced the pitch-black forest. "Who's there? Show yourself." There was no answer. The snowflakes began to spin rapidly and spiraled in Kagan's direction. When he swept the snow aside with his sword, the chill in the air froze his arm. Before he had a chance to break free, a bolt of lightning struck his back. During Stephen's trial, he'd absorbed a fraction of the lightning and stored it inside him. Power from the heavens was stronger than any martial arts technique. Kagan's flesh tore open, and the lightning almost pierced straight through his body. Stephen followed up with the waves of energy from his sword. The Asuras leaped into action to protect their chief. They condensed a barrier of light, dispersing the waves of energy in particles. The barrier unleashed spheres of energy in the direction where the attack had come from. The place where Stephen was standing only seconds before was bombarded into craters. He had already started running after throwing out his energy waves. He'd accomplished what he came here to do, so there was no reason to stick around. Stephen and Liam went back to the Dragon Clan's residence and spent the night. The next morning, they bid farewell to the prophet and headed to the city. The iridescent dragon was beyond relieved to see Stephen walk into the jewelry store. Sitting around all day and pretending to be a sales associate was a whole new type of torture. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever come back. Aren't you worried about your business going bankrupt? You were gone for a while, but I only sold 10 pieces. The customers will be coming later for a divination." Stephen ruffled the iridescent dragon's hair. "With an outstanding manager like you, I'll make it big someday." He opened the drawer behind the counter and took out his phone. There were several messages from Vivian. There wasn't anything urgent. She knew he was busy preparing for the recruitment and just told him to give her a call when he was back. He sent a reply, telling her that he was back in the city to check on the store. Her response came almost instantly. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes later, a limo pulled up at the entrance. Vivian entered the store and took a seat on the couch like she owned the place. Liam couldn't help but stare in confusion. This was Stephen's store. Who exactly was this woman, and why was she acting so familiar with him? The Mystic Covenant finished constructing their venue for the recruitment. It's in the Haven Dominion, and it's around the same size as the previous competitions. The Lord of Minori City is planning to bring my father, some friends, and relatives to visit. The Elysian Realm had 5 domains: the Sky Domain in the east, the Scarlet Sun Domain in the south, the Polar Domain in the west, the Glacial Domain in the north, and the Haven Domain in the center. There were over 100 cities in each domain, and they were ranked based on the number of cultivators and their strength. Minori City was ranked in the top 5 cities of the Sky Domain. Considering the city's high rank, it went without saying that the Lord of Minori City was a formidable cultivator with impeccable management skills. Stephen wasn't interested. What does that have to do with me? Don't tell me the participants have to follow the city lord to the venue before the recruitment starts. Your guess is half correct, but it's not a requirement, Vivian said. Regular participants have to wait, but those with connections can go there ahead of time. What difference does that make? It's not like the connections will earn you a guaranteed spot in the expeditionary team. Becoming a member of the Mystic Covenant isn't the only way to improve your status. Participants who performed well during the recruitment but weren't selected might catch the eye of the city lords and become their subordinates. There's a higher chance if they meet you before the recruitment starts. Whether you become a city lord subordinate or join the Mystic Covenant's expeditionary team, you'll receive wealth and status. We're in a relationship, so you can come with me. It'll save you time and effort. Before Stephen could respond, Liam slammed his hands on the counter and stood up. He thought Stephen was a devoted husband who only had eyes for Kim. Their love was unbreakable, or so it seemed. Clearly, he'd misjudged him. Stephen was having an affair in the Elysian Realm behind Kim's back. She would be devastated when she found out. Liam was disappointed, but he stayed calm and kept his tone even. Mr. Adams, this isn't like you. Were you forced into a relationship? Is she threatening you? When did it start? Why? Stephen held up a hand, interrupting Liam's barrage of questions. Calm down. We're not in a relationship. It's just for show. Vivian rolled her eyes. He is not even my type. His cultivation is below average, and he has 0 talent for running a business. He's the same as any other ordinary person on the streets. Liam's anger was redirected at Vivian. She was criticizing the sovereign to his face. Stephen stepped between them to prevent an argument from breaking out. We're getting off track. When is the city lord leaving? In 3 days. Meet me at the city gate. Stephen decided to leave Liam at the store with the iridescent dragon. He wasn't an ascender, and things would get complicated if his identity was exposed. There wouldn't be too many customers to bother him, and he could use his free time to cultivate. At this time, the Lord of Minori City was at a high-end restaurant with the heads of the Bellantine and Bowen families. He raised his wine glass for a toast. We have countless wealthy families in the city, but you two run the most successful businesses. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to watch the recruitment. The more talent we have, the smoother our businesses will develop. The participants who were selected to join the expeditionary team were the best of the bunch, but that didn't mean the other cultivators weren't talented just because they weren't chosen. You two have someone you'd like to recommend, don't you? Who are they? The city lord asked. The head of the Bowen family proudly introduced his son, Shaddle. He felt a sense of superiority compared to the head of the Bellantine family. His daughter, Vivian, was their heir, but she wasn't that strong of a cultivator. She was only slightly better than an ascender who'd just broken through to the true immortal realm. The head of the Bowen family gave Vivian's father a triumphant look. What about you? Who do you recommend? It couldn't possibly be your potential son-in-law, right? Vivian's father forced a smile. Yes, it's him. His name is Stephen. Ever since Vivian turned down Shaddle's proposal, the relationship between the Bellantine and Bowen families was laced with tension. If they couldn't be in-laws, the only other option was to become business competitors. Despite the city lord's fearsome reputation, he was interested in gossip. I haven't heard of anyone named Stephen. Where's he from? The Dragon Clan's prophet is his teacher. Unfortunately, he hasn't reached the level of ascension. Surely he must have some potential. The prophet chose him as a student, and you recommended him to me. Vivian's father quickly denied it. He didn't think too highly of Stephen's cultivation. He couldn't let the city lord expect too much from him. He's in a relationship with my daughter, but their marriage hasn't been decided yet. He needs to prove his capabilities during the competition. The head of the Bowen family took a sip of wine, quietly listening to their exchange. Not all hope was lost. There was still a chance between Shaddle and Vivian. He just needed to wait for Stephen to die on the battlefield. Three days later, Stephen found Vivian among the crowd of luxury vehicles and climbed into her car. His actions didn't go unnoticed. Everyone else around them turned to stare. Their relationship was only a rumor, but witnessing them in the car together made the scandal credible. Vivian hadn't noticed at the store, but Stephen's cultivation had reached the level of ascension in the short time they hadn't met. He cultivated surprisingly fast. Shaddle's in the car behind us. I don't know what he's up to, but don't get careless. Okay, is there anything else to do on this trip besides attend social gatherings? Find a blacksmith to upgrade your weapon. I already have a weapon. That piece of scrap metal you call a sword, any random cultivator at the recruitment can snap it in half. Stephen was at a loss for words. Cultivators from higher planes were ridiculously strong. His chances of being selected to join the expeditionary team decreased the more he knew. In the luxury car behind theirs, Shaddle was glaring at the back of Stephen's head. It should have been him sitting next to Vivian. He couldn't figure out why Stephen would participate in such a dangerous competition when his cultivation was so low. His bodyguards had made the preparations to teach Stephen a lesson, but coincidentally, he went missing the very next day. Now that he was back, they could put their plan into motion. The motorcade arrived at the Haven domain late into the night. Aside from a few buildings, there was nothing around except dense forests. Stephen and Vivian checked into their hotel and headed up to their rooms. Shortly after Stephen went to his room, a knock sounded at the door. A waiter brought him a tray of fruits and desserts. The fruit on the plate was crystal clear, and it contained pure spiritual energy. Stephen took a bite, and a refreshing sensation washed over him. What fruit is this? How is this grown? It's called a gemstone bodhi, the waiter said. First, you'll have to choose a patch of fertile soil and set up a spiritual energy gathering array. Second, plant the seed inside and water it daily with blood from beasts. That was too complicated for Stephen. He couldn't imagine spending all that time and effort growing a fruit. Consuming high-end fruit helps cultivators progress and stabilize their foundation, the waiter went on to explain as he placed the tray on the table. They have many beneficial uses. After the waiter left, Stephen stared at the fruits on the plate. He'd gone from being a leader of a country to a country bumpkin who'd never seen the real world. In any case, he couldn't waste these valuable fruits. He didn't have much of an appetite, but he ate everything the waiter brought. With nothing better to do after dinner, Stephen checked on his internal world. The primitive villages had turned into large-scale towns. The houses' designs were a bit crude, but they were sturdy enough to withstand rain, wind, snow, and wild animals. A neat pile of firewood was stacked outside each house. The ancient humans had become more proficient in using fire. They were also growing crops in the open space outside town. Stephen's consciousness took on its original appearance and descended next to the priest. To the ancient humans, Stephen was a god who was here to guide their people to a better life. When they engaged in conversation, there were no longer language barriers between them. The ancient humans had learned the alphabet he'd engraved on the stone slabs. Stephen taught the priest how to make more efficient tools and gave him a simple map drawn on animal skin showing him the locations of mines to excavate energy-rich ores. When Stephen returned to the real world, it was already midnight. He heard footsteps outside the hotel and looked out the window to see what was going on. Guards were patrolling the area. They had a badge on their uniform, which he didn't recognize. As if sensing his gaze, one of the guards looked up and made eye contact. Stephen's world was flipped upside down. He felt disoriented like a hammer had struck him in the head. He staggered and collapsed onto the couch with a groan. Why was every cultivator in the Elysian realm so temperamental? And why were there so many rules? All he did was stare for a minute or two. Was it a crime to be curious? Receiving one warning was enough for Stephen. He closed the window, washed up, and crawled into bed to sleep. At dawn, Vivian came knocking on his door. Are you still asleep? The blacksmith is a busy man. The sooner you give him your weapon, the better. You might have to wait days for him to finish. Stephen rolled over and pulled the covers over his face. He'd only gotten around 4 hours of sleep. Is he the only blacksmith in the realm? It has to be him. He's the best in the field. Stephen heaved a sigh and dragged himself out of bed to get ready for a long day. At the blacksmith's factory, rows of furnaces were placed side by side. There were different types of metallic solutions inside each one to be forged according to when each customer placed their order. Dozens of the blacksmith's students were running back and forth. They didn't need their teacher to handle these small matters. Only honored guests had a chance to witness his true craftsmanship. When Stephen entered the factory, a wave of scorching heat surrounded him. He tried to use the kiln's spiritual energy to absorb the heat, but it didn't work, so he had to resist the high temperature with his own body's defenses. Vivian went up to the blacksmith and greeted him like they were old friends. "Mr. Mariah, it's been a long time. How have you been? You have so many students. Do you need to personally supervise them?" "Of course I do. If they make a mistake and forge a defective weapon, it'll ruin my reputation. They'll be masters of their craft in around 10 years. I'll retire then." "You're in your prime. It'd be a waste if you retire so soon." Mariah stroked his beard proudly. It was obvious he enjoyed the praise from his craftsmanship. While he and Vivian were catching up, his gaze shifted to Stephen. He was a little surprised when he found out that she was in a relationship with him. He had reached the phase of ascension, but his cultivation was still considered fairly low. He and the Bellantine family weren't compatible. Vivian didn't get into the details. She cut to the chase. "Would it be possible to upgrade his weapon? The competition is about to start. He's one of the participants." Young people shouldn't risk their lives because of a little ambition. Based on previous years, the only cultivators who survive are those above the level of ascension. "Don't worry, he's the prophet's student. His teacher wouldn't have let him participate in a dangerous competition if he didn't divine his survival." "I see." Mariah held out his hand to Stephen, and he gave him his sword. Mariah inspected every inch of the hilt and the blade. With one glance, he could even assess its internal condition. Stephen's sword wasn't indestructible. After countless battles, there were permanent marks on both the outside and the inside. "The material is one of the worst I've ever seen. Whoever forged this sword must have used random materials from a lower realm and ripped you off. The only thing they did right was to refine it with the soul of a sword. It can make up for your low cultivation, but a true cultivator wins battles without a weapon. Predicting an opponent's moves is handy, but it'll be useless if there's no attack to predict." Stephen was enlightened. The first move set the tone for every battle. The cultivator's strength and speed determined the outcome, not their weapon. Even the simplest of moves like punching and kicking could be fatal depending on the cultivator's skill. Flashy martial arts techniques were useless. "Thank you for your advice. Would it be possible to refine my sword?" "I'll do it because of Vivian. Stand to the side and wait quietly." Stephen severed his spiritual connection with his sword as Mariah tossed it into the boiling metallic solution. Mariah used high-quality ores to replace the inferior materials that had been used to forge it. The sword was stripped down to its core, and new materials replaced its shell. 10 hours later, he removed the sword from the furnace and hammered it. The hammer was larger than a water tank. After the exterior was molded, a special amplification rune was engraved on the surface. Mariah's students came over with a container of liquid. When the sword was dropped inside, it sizzled and cooled. "Place a drop of your blood on the sword, so it'll recognize you as its owner. I hope your mental energy is enough to wield it. The stronger the wielder, the stronger the weapon." Stephen pricked his finger, and the drop of blood was absorbed into the sword, re-establishing their spiritual connection. Even without infusing his inner energy into the sword, it was overflowing with power. As Mariah had said, if weaker cultivations forcefully tried to wield it, they would fail and suffer a backlash. Vivian respectfully handed her bank card to Mariah. "Keep the extra. Think of it as a small token of appreciation." Mariah took the card without checking the balance. He'd been working with the Bellantine family for decades. All their family's weapons were produced by his factory. It was already midnight, but Mariah had 2 more visitors. They were the famous sons of the Sheridan family in the Haven domain. "You're just in time. Your swords are ready." Mariah handed them 2 willow leaf swords forged from a fine and delicate material. They were different from regular weapons. They were flexible and can bend at unnatural angles, making it difficult for the opponent to predict their trajectory. "Your craftsmanship is incredible. Have you considered our proposal from earlier?" "I'll be retiring in around a decade. I don't plan to partner with your family." "Aren't you interested in ores from other realms? Their unique attributes will help you forge better weapons." Mariah firmly repeated his answer and dismissed the 2 brothers. He'd forged weapons for many elite cultivators during his career and earned enough money to last several lifetimes. He didn't need any more money. After the Sheridan brothers left, Mariah felt Vivian's curious gaze on him. They're confident they'll be selected to join the expeditionary team and have an opportunity to trade ores with other realms, he explained. They want to work with my factory, but I'm not interested. The more weapons I forge, the higher the risk of a war breaking out. Conflict isn't my goal. I've been working as a blacksmith for a long time, and I'm about to retire. I have no plans to get involved with them. As Vivian and Stephen left the factory, they passed by a luxury car parked beneath a tree. The Sheridan brothers were muttering to each other, but their voices were too low for them to hear what they were talking about. The Sheridan brothers needed Mariah's help to develop their family's business, but he wasn't interested in collaborating with them. I heard he has a daughter. She's young, and her cultivation isn't that high. If we kidnap her and pretend to save her, he'll be forced to owe us a favor. I don't know if that's a good idea. Cultivators from all over the realm are coming to the Haven domain to prepare for the recruitment. There are guards everywhere. Our family is wealthy, but there are rules we have to follow. Mariah doesn't live around here. His home is in the glacial domain to the north. We'll target his daughter when he's not around. When Vivian and Stephen went back to the hotel, the head of the Bellantine family called them over. Stephen, it's a big deal for the city lord to invite me to watch the recruitment together. Your performance will affect our family and Minori City's reputations. Don't let your guard down. Have you been cultivating? Your cultivation needs to improve by the time the recruitment starts. After passing his heavenly trial and ascending, Stephen was at a loss of where to go from here. Cultivation manuals from the human realm couldn't help him progress anymore. He needed another way to train. Do you have any suggestions? Do you know about the Mystic Covenant's skylit tower? It has over 1,000 floors, and it extends into the sky. To proceed up the tower, you'll need to defeat cultivators on every floor as a test. When you reach a certain height, you'll receive a corresponding prize. If you do well, you might not even need to participate in the recruitment to join the expeditionary team. Stephen had been itching to test out his new weapon, and Skylit Tower was the ideal training ground. It was the tallest building in the Haven domain, and it was originally built to train the Mystic Covenant's members. After it was opened to the public, it gradually evolved into what it was today. To the Mystic Covenant, the tower was like a printer for money. The prizes were tempting, but the admissions tickets were expensive. The prices were determined based on the cultivator's strength. Those at the level of Ascension had to pay 500,000 purple gold coins for a ticket, and the price increased by 200,000 with each subsequent tier. After entering, the cultivators would have to fight one after another to progress up the tower. The opponent on every 100th floor was fixed, while cultivators were randomly matched on every other floor. The next morning, Stephen and Vivian took a seat in the tower's lobby to carefully review the rulebook. Killing the opponent was prohibited. Whoever broke this rule would have to pay a hefty compensation. From the way your father was introducing the tower, I thought it would be a gruesome life-and-death training ground, Stephen said. The Mystic Covenant was established to maintain the peace of the Six Realms, not to create more conflicts, Vivian explained. And as long as no one dies, they can keep coming back. The admissions tickets are more profitable than you think. What I'm hearing is that the tower is a business. The goal is to make money. If you're not confident, then sit in the audience and see what it's like. That's a waste of time. I'll go in and experience it myself. Stephen paid 500,000 purple gold coins for an admission ticket and strolled inside. He was expecting to find one fighting ring, but the hall was densely packed with arenas. One arena wasn't enough to accommodate the sheer number of cultivators purchasing tickets every day. It would take forever to ascend the floors. Stephen watched cultivators being knocked out of the ring one by one. The Mystic Covenant earned at least 500,000 purple gold coins from each of them, and they would have to pay for another ticket if they wanted to try again. He wondered how many properties the Mystic Covenant had. The speed at which they earned income was way too fast. No wonder everyone wanted to join their faction. The crystal-clear screen hanging from the ceiling at the center of the hall displayed Stephen and his opponent's numbers. They walked over to the empty arena together. There were no restrictions aside from killing. Weapons were allowed. Stephen drew his sword, his opponent brandished an axe, and the two of them lunged for each other. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. The rush of energy almost knocked Stephen off his feet. He lasted a few more rounds of head-to-head confrontation before he had to step back. He went to the edge of the arena and used his speed to create afterimages to confuse his opponent. The arena was small, and there weren't that many tactics to choose from. Stephen's opponent stood at the center and spun on his heel, swinging his axe in circles. Violent gusts of wind covered the arena, rendering the afterimages useless. Stephen's prediction lost its effect. Even if he could see through the wind's trajectory, there was nowhere to go. He blocked some of the wind with his sword and used his other hand to throw out energy waves. Hundreds of rounds later, cracks accumulated on the axe, and it shattered into metallic shards. Stephen dashed up to his opponent and kicked him out of the arena, sealing his victory. The randomized matches were surprisingly accurate. On the first floor, the computer matched cultivators with similar cultivations. The difficulty went up as they ascended to a higher floor. Stephen didn't have time to observe the tower. His next opponent stepped into the ring. Hours later, he'd fought a total of 10 battles and won all 10 of them. Vivian was watching from the audience. Stephen's speed at taking down his opponents was only average. There were many cultivators in the other arenas winning their matches in one move. It was obvious they had an invitation to the Mystic Covenant's recruitment. They were here as a warm-up and practice their skills. In the time Stephen had taken to win 10 matches, they would have won 100. After the 10th match, Stephen decided to call it a day. When the referee asked him if he wanted to exchange his points for the corresponding prize, he said no. The more points he accumulated, the more valuable the prize would be. But there was a catch. If he lost any match before exchanging his points, he would lose everything he'd accumulated. Most cultivators believed in their strength and held off on exchanging their points for prizes. More often than not, they were eventually defeated and lost all of their points. With this common mindset, the tower had saved up a considerable amount of prizes. But that wasn't the only reason. The randomization in opponents wasn't as random as it seemed. When a cultivator had too many points, the computer would automatically match them with a stronger opponent. Shaddle was also in the audience watching Stephen's matches. There's nothing special about his cultivation. His sword is strong, though. Tell the people you've found to come to the tower tomorrow and have them finish their matches at around the same time as Stephen. As the oldest son of the Bowen family, Shaddle had other ways to finance his lavish spending, even though his father had frozen his bank cards. His bodyguards didn't have to worry about the fees for recruitment or the admissions tickets. They're cultivators from mercenary groups. No one will know who they are. They can't kill him, but they're more than capable of inflicting a serious injury. It'll affect his performance in the upcoming competition. The Haven domain was just as large as the Sky domain. Stephen and Vivian found a hotel near the Skylit Tower to spend the night. Stephen's opponents weren't particularly strong. They excelled at one trait, such as speed, strength, or swordsmanship. He would have had a harder time winning his matches if their specialties were combined. Before sleeping, Stephen laid in bed and entered his internal world with his consciousness. The ancient humans were wielding metal tools, and their town had expanded tenfold. They were also raising animals on a farm. The priest noticed his arrival and hurried over. Every time this mysterious god appeared, their lives changed for the better. Stephen used his energy to project a spar between the cultivators to teach the priest martial arts. He also gave him a stack of simple books to expand his knowledge. When the priest left to relay what he'd learned to his community, Stephen's gaze shifted to the mountains. His internal world was as big as the real world. The ancient humans were developing right on track. It was time to check in on the other inhabitants. The beasts in the forest hunted and killed each other day and night. The entire mountain was filled with the scent of blood and their killing intent. If this continued, they would never be able to develop. Stephen used his authority as the world's creator to implement restrictions and set limitations on their senseless killing. He also carved murals onto stone slabs to help develop their intelligence. At dawn, Stephen and Vivian went back to the Skylit Tower. It was open to the public 24 hours a day, and the matches continued through the night. Cultivators didn't need to maintain a regular sleep schedule like ordinary humans. Stephen's first 3 matches flew by without much effort. During the 4th match, his opponent was a mercenary. The Bowen family had hired him to injure Stephen in exchange for a generous reward. The mercenary's weapon of choice was a 15-foot-long whip with blades protruding from the lower end. He made the first move and aimed for Stephen's face. The space inside the arena was limited, and there was hardly any room to dodge. Stephen couldn't deflect the whip with his sword because he would lose his only weapon if it was pulled or knocked out of his hand. As he dashed across the arena and evaded the whip as best he could, the wind whistled past him. It was unpleasant and grated on his nerves. His senses zeroed in on the sound, and he felt an urge to rush towards the whip and cut off the noise. The ice dragon's voice in his mind stopped his impulsive urges. When the whip bends, the friction in the air produces sounds. He's infusing his inner energy into the sound waves to interfere with your mental state. That's a high-level technique. Why would the computer match me with him? That's not important right now. Use your lightning to disperse his sound waves. Stephen enveloped his sword in lightning and inserted the tip into the floor of the arena. Crackles of lightning spread across the ring, accompanied by deafening explosions. The mercenary leaped into the air to avoid being electrocuted. Before he had a chance to strike with his whip again, Stephen gathered the aura in his sword and condensed thousands of blades above the arena. They fell at high speed with the mercenary as their target. The whip coiled around him protectively and spun rapidly. The blades bounced off the whip and scattered into particles of light. The mercenary was mostly unscathed except for a small scratch on his arm. His aura soared as he threw his whip into the air. It disappeared into the cloud of black mist and condensed into a python. It dove for Stephen with the mercenary following closely behind. Stephen raised his sword to block, but the python bit the end and shoved it aside. He didn't have time to react to the mercenary's fists. A flurry of punches landed on his arm, chest, and abdomen. When he staggered, the mercenary grabbed his collar and threw him over his shoulder, sending him crashing into the middle of the arena. Cracks spread along the floor, and Stephen felt like his bones were on the verge of shattering. He scrambled to his feet just as the mercenary's fist slammed into his face. Whenever he came into contact with the mercenary, a strange energy was released into his body. It was like an iron clamp and was clasped around his meridians, preventing him from circulating his inner energy. The mercenary repeatedly landed his punches, but it didn't do as much damage as he expected. He watched in surprise as Stephen's skin cracked and crumbled into the sand. Stephen had used the threadworm's spiritual energy to condense a layer of camouflaging iron sand over his skin. It absorbed most of the impact from the mercenary's fists. While the mercenary was processing what had just happened, Stephen seized the opportunity to condense a storm of iron sand. The raging winds forced the python to release its hold on the sword. It was swept into the storm. The iron fragments pierced together to form rotating blades. They spiraled towards the python and grated on its scales. The mercenary dispersed his manifestation, and the whip had returned to its original form. There were deep scratches on its exterior. The storm of iron sand transformed into a tornado and swept across the arena towards the mercenary. He manifested a phantom of a massive golden hand. It pressed down on the raging winds to stop its advance. Stephen knew he was losing the match, and he casually leaped out of the ring. "I surrender. Thank you for the spar. I learned a lot." The mercenary glared at him. "You're giving up? Don't you have any dignity?" "Admitting defeat isn't a violation of the rules, right?" Stephen glanced at the referee, and he nodded in acknowledgement. The mercenary was outraged. He'd spent half a day fighting random opponents just to get matched with Stephen. Not only was his whip damaged, he'd also failed to injure him, which meant he wasn't getting that reward money. Shaddle was also in a bad mood. The mercenary had failed, and he didn't know if Stephen was going to purchase another ticket for another match. Instead of wasting more money, he told his subordinate to drive him back to the hotel. Compared to Shaddle and the mercenary, Stephen was in a good mood. He lost the last match, but he didn't sustain any injuries. He considered that an achievement. When he climbed into the car, he saw Vivian on the phone with a grave expression. "Stay calm. I'll ask my family's mercenaries to search for her. The culprit's goal might be money. She'll be safe for now." She hung up and made a few calls. "What's going on?" Stephen asked when she finished. Mosiah's daughter was kidnapped. She was taken somewhere between the glacial and heaven domains. Mosiah spends most of his time forging weapons. It's hard to believe someone has a grudge against him. They arrived at the scene of the crime and found Mosiah crowding around the car by the side of the road with his students. The culprit had taken his daughter while she had been driving to the Haven domain. Vivian inspected the car. "There's no blood or debris, and I can't sense any aura. I don't think your daughter was harmed. I just want to know where she is." "Calm down. I've asked my family's mercenaries to search the area. Let's wait for an update." Vivian sounded more confident than she felt. There weren't any surveillance cameras, and this road wasn't under the jurisdiction of the main cities. The culprit had planned thoroughly before taking action. Mosiah turned to Stephen for help. "You're the prophet's student. Can't you divine her location? I can pay you any price." I'm sorry, but my abilities are limited. They only work if the person is in front of me. Stephen's cultivation was limited, so he couldn't use the Book of Destiny to its full extent. He couldn't divine anything complicated or too far into the future. He summoned the threadworms, and they transformed into tiny clones of themselves. They burrowed into the soil to search for clues. Mosiah's daughter had been kidnapped in the middle of nowhere. The culprit could be anywhere. 30 minutes later, the threadworms found a trail of cloth 10 miles away from the road. Mosiah recognized the design. The fabric was from the outfit his daughter was wearing this morning. As the sun began to set, a blanket of fog settled over the mountain. The two Sheridan brothers were hiking through the forest with their subordinates while carrying Mosiah's unconscious daughter. They wiped the sweat from their foreheads and stopped in front of a cave. The Elysian realm was big, and most of the population was cultivators. Criminal activity was unavoidable. The authorities were only responsible for capturing criminals who committed heinous crimes. Small-scale cases like kidnappings were left to the public to resolve. The Sheridan brothers were dressed in black and wearing masks. They chose the cave as their temporary hideout. They would wait a couple more hours before contacting Mosiah and pretending to have found his daughter. At this time, the threadworms were gliding quickly through the forest, leading Stephen, Mosiah, Vivian, and his family's mercenaries to the culprits. They were following the traces in the wilderness and footprints in the soil. The culprits had cast a defensive array to hide their auras, but the threadworms' clothes were everywhere on the mountain. Nothing escaped their notice. "The culprits took your daughter to a cave," Stephen said. "She's safe, but there are around 6 cultivators guarding her." "What should we do? What if they run off when they see us?" Mosiah anxiously made up his mind to confront the culprits alone and negotiate, but Stephen stopped him. "Approaching the culprits directly isn't the answer. We should wait until the sky turns dark and ambush them." They had differing opinions, so they turned to Vivian and waited for her decision. The Bellantine family's mercenaries were elite cultivators. She was their superior and therefore had the highest authority among the group. After careful consideration, Vivian agreed with Stephen. "The culprits haven't contacted you. We don't know why they kidnapped your daughter. Maybe they never planned to negotiate with you. Ambushing them is risky, but we need to take the initiative." "From what I saw through the threadworm's vision, your daughter's unconscious," Stephen added. "I can't tell what they did to her. They could have knocked her out using mental energy or forced her to consume some unknown substance. We need to take action as soon as possible." Mosiah gritted his teeth and agreed. Everyone stared at the fog in the sky, waiting for the orange glow from the setting sun to disappear. As the sky darkened, the threadworms dug a tunnel underground leading to the cave to bypass the defensive array. They condensed a layer of iron sand around Mosiah's daughter. The Sheridan brothers' subordinates were standing guard at the entrance of the cave, unaware of what was happening inside. The ground below Mosiah's daughter opened up, and she fell into the pit. Stephen caught her at the bottom and brought her deeper into the tunnel. The sound alerted the Sheridan brothers and their subordinates. They rushed into the cave and spotted the hole in the ground. When they peered over the edge, the Bellantine family's mercenaries released a torrent of aura. It shot into the ground in a pillar of light, forcing them to step back. The hole in the ground was too narrow to give chase. The Sheridan brothers valued their lives, and they couldn't risk getting their subordinates killed. The cave began to shake, and rocks piled at the entrance. They rushed outside right before the cave collapsed. Inside the tunnel, Stephen overrode the foreign mental energy inside Mosiah's daughter with his own to help her regain consciousness. Mosiah was relieved that she was safe and unharmed. A few of the threadworm's clones had crawled into the Sheridan brothers' pockets and were following them out of the forest. They transmitted their location to Stephen, and he threw an artillery shell into the distance. It had been reinforced with lightning and thunder, which increased its speed and damage output. An explosion shook the mountain. The threadworm spoke in his mind. "Your aim was perfect, but they're still alive. Should we kill them off?" "No, let them go back to Haven Domain. We shouldn't attract too much attention." Their group descended the mountain and headed back to Mosiah's factory. Mosiah saw Stephen in a new light. He expressed his gratitude and offered to forge weapons and equipment for him in the future. Vivian was planning to report the kidnapping to the authorities. They hadn't figured out who the culprits were, but maybe the authorities knew. The Sheridan brothers and their subordinates managed to escape the burning mountain. They weren't fatally injured, but their skin had been burned from the explosion, and their clothes were a mess. Their subordinates were furious. The Sheridan brothers had hired them specifically to kidnap Mosiah's daughter. It was supposed to be an easy mission, but they'd somehow ended up with injuries that would take a week to heal. The Sheridan brothers didn't have a satisfactory explanation to give. They took out their bank card to compensate for the damages. In the following days, the Bellantine family and the authorities cooperated and conducted a joint investigation, but they didn't find any leads. The Sheridan family was influential in the Haven domain. It wasn't hard for them to hide their tracks. Stephen spent his days in the skylit tower to train. He won most of his matches, but he always lost at a crucial moment. His points were cleared whenever he was close to accumulating a certain amount. The Mystic Covenant sent an emissary to the Haven domain to gather the city lords and the people to accompany them. They met at the mansion next to the skylit tower, which was another one of the Mystic Covenant's properties. The emissary was dressed to the nines. He elegantly made his entrance in front of the crowd. The hall had been extravagantly decorated for the occasion. The staff served food and liquor, but none of the guests paid attention. Their gazes were on the emissary, waiting for him to speak. The emissary cleared his throat and began his speech. Thank you all for showing interest in our recruitment. The duty of our expeditionary team is to maintain peace across the 6 realms. I've compiled the profiles of participants who are a cut above the rest. They're exempt from the first round and will automatically proceed to the second. The participants who were a cut above the rest were typically those with connections and a complicated background. They were usually stronger than the others and went around in teams. If they joined the first round, the regular participants would have a hard time making it to the second round. Some of the regular participants were talented and had potential. It'd be a waste for them to fall in the first round without showing their capabilities. To even the playing field and give every participant the chance to shine, the Mystic Covenant automatically moved the team-based participants to the second round. The guests expressed their gratitude to the emissary for letting their people skip the first round. With the most important agenda out of the way, the atmosphere turned lively. The emissary announced a voluntary donation in the name of a charity to the Mystic Covenant. The big shots in attendance didn't hesitate to contribute. The regular participants didn't meet the requirements to attend the meeting, but as Vivian's supposed partner, Stephen was allowed into the hall, and he was given a free pass to the second round. The two of them sat in the corner, minding their own business. They weren't interested in socializing. Are they spending money to get out of participating in the first round? Stephen whispered to Vivian. The wealthy families in the Elysian realm weren't that different from the human realm. What are you complaining about? My family's paying for it. If you want to join the first round, I'll let my father know. Forget it. It'll look bad on him if he takes back his donation. Skipping the first round had its perks. They could assess the other participants' skills ahead of time. The only problem was they didn't know where it would be held. Shadow came over with a smile and a glass of wine in his hand. Miss Vivian, would you like to have a drink with me? Sorry, I'm not in the mood. Shadow took Vivian's rejection in stride and sat next to Stephen. That's fine. I'd like to chat with your friend. Mr. Stephen, I heard you've been spending a lot of time in the sky-split tower. Your cultivation must have improved by leaps and bounds. If I participated, do you think we'll be matched together for a spar? I'm no match for you, Stephen said. I'll have to give up if you're my opponent. That's a bit disappointing. I value my life, you see. Stephen forfeited his matches in the sky-split tower when he came across opponents he couldn't beat. That was the secret to preventing injuries. Shadow wasn't interested in talking to this good-for-nothing anymore. He turned his attention to Vivian. Your family has a team of experienced mercenaries. They're skilled enough to take on high-level missions. I have a friend in the Mystic Covenant. Would you like me to introduce you? Not interested, Vivian said dismissively. My father handles the family business. You should discuss this with him instead of me. Her blunt and indifferent reply made Shadow feel awkward. While he was thinking about how to strike up another conversation, the emissary announced the location of the first round. It'd be held in the underground Holy Ruins. The Elysian realm was in an era of peace, but it wasn't always free of war. Tens of thousands of years ago, the realm was divided and locked in intense conflict. Some cultivators wanted to unify the realm, while others wanted to maintain their independence. The flames of war ravaged the land as cultivators perished on the battlefield. When their numbers dwindled to a dangerous low, they were forced to sit down and compromise. In contemporary times, the Holy Ruins was an ancient battlefield that only existed in rumors. There were very few people who'd seen the ruins with their own eyes. After all, it was buried deep underground. The Mystic Covenant found a teleportation array to the Holy Ruins by chance, the emissary continued. There may be hidden treasures yet to be discovered. Spectators will have to stay on the surface and watch the first round through a projection. However, those who are exempt from the first round may choose to participate if they want to. The guests broke into discussion. Despite the danger, it was tempting to visit the underground ruins for a chance to obtain treasures left behind by ancient cultivators. After the meeting ended, Stephen drove to Harmonia Pavilion. Liam and the iridescent dragon had been managing the store and cultivating in their free time. Stephen was exempt from the first round due to his connection with the Ballantine family, but the same didn't apply to Liam. Stephen sat Liam down for a serious discussion. During the first round, your priority is to find somewhere to hide and wait it out. Try to get information on our competitors if you can, but don't provoke anyone and avoid a direct confrontation. Okay, I've been cultivating ever since I came here, but I'm only at the intermediate stage of the immortal realm. I don't think I can go much higher. That's fine. The lower your cultivation, the less your opponents will pay attention to you. Remember, keep a low profile. Stephen turned to the iridescent dragon. The Mystic Covenant's emissary had clarified the restrictions during the meeting. Participants were allowed to bring their mounts along. They were typically beasts who'd signed a blood contract with the cultivator. There was still time before the recruitment, and Stephen wanted to find a mount for Liam. He couldn't let him participate in the first round alone. Stephen wasn't familiar with the Elysian realm, but the iridescent dragon was. Do you know where we can find some beasts, preferably the friendly ones? The iridescent dragon gave him an unimpressed look. You're too naive. Do you really think beasts who've ascended to the Elysian realm are friendly and that easy to capture? You never know. It doesn't hurt to try. Stephen placed a map on the table. Beasts had strong territorial instincts. For example, the only beasts around the Dragon Clan's castle were dragons. The beasts were spread out, and the Elysian realm was too big for him to search. The iridescent dragon analyzed the map and settled on a swamp to the southeast. The beasts in this area aren't physically appealing. Most cultivators wouldn't choose them as their mounts if they had a choice. There won't be any competition. It was better than nothing. Stephen left the store to a group of staff Vivian had picked out and drove them to the swamp with Liam. They were the only cultivators on the road. Battles were prohibited in the city, but not when they were outside. Leaving the city was risky. Stephen and Liam peered over the edge of the swamp, not knowing where or how to begin their search. It doesn't matter how you cross, the iridescent dragon said. You'll be attacked either way. Just fly at a low altitude near the edge, and you'll find the beast you're looking for. Stephen and Liam did as they were told. As soon as they moved closer to the murky waters, the mud parted, and tentacles shot towards them. Thousands of frenzied octopuses were hiding in the water. Stephen deflected the tentacles with his sword, leaving only a shallow scratch behind. Dark green fluid seeped out of the wound and stitched the scratch back together. Black ink gushed into the air and burst into a dense fog. Stephen's goal wasn't to kill the beasts. He was here to find a mount for Liam, but there was no getting through to them when they were being aggressive. The beasts in the swamp were on an entirely different level from the beasts in the Asura realm. They went back to shore, and Stephen debated using the necklace of beast fangs. It had been refined and embedded in the hilt of his sword, but it still retained its abilities. A dozen crocodiles appeared out of thin air. They were as large as a transport truck. What do you think? Stephen asked, gesturing to the crocodiles. They can fight on land and water. Liam cast a wary gaze over the swamp. What if they eat me? Beasts eat everything. The crocodiles dived into the swamp. Tentacles wrapped around them, but they had no effect on their metallic bodies. The crocodiles bit the tentacles every time the octopuses attacked. Their regeneration couldn't keep up with the speed of injury. What about the octopus? Stephen asked. If you save them, maybe they'll be friendlier. Liam shook his head. I'm not sure how useful they'll be under the sun. What if they shrivel up? There's no restriction on the number of beasts you form a blood contract with. During the day, you can ask other beasts to help you. I don't think my spiritual energy is strong enough to form a connection with that many beasts. Compared to Stephen, who'd formed a spiritual connection with the ice dragon on a whim, Liam placed more importance on the first mount of his life. The swamp calmed down as the octopuses fled, leaving their severed limbs behind. The crocodiles were less aggressive than the octopuses. They let Stephen and Liam on their backs as they made their way across the swamp. The further they went, the more beasts they sensed hiding among the trees. When the crocodiles passed by, the beasts retreated quickly. The stronger the species, the smarter they were. Stephen and Liam couldn't see them, but they sensed their auras. A swarm of bats swooped down from the sky and attacked them. They were fast and agile. They dodged every wave of energy Stephen threw at them. He formed a barrier of fire and scared the bats from approaching. They flapped their wings from a distance and sent sound waves in their direction. Stephen and Liam weren't affected by the interference. They kept their mental state calm and let the sound waves brush past them harmlessly. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed from below. Stephen looked down and saw a school of fish with sharp teeth gnawing on the crocodiles. He scared them away with crackles of lightning above the water, and the crocodiles continued deeper into the swamp. They came across a massive turtle submerged in the water. Its shell was covered in algae and small marine creatures. If it weren't for the faint aura it emitted, they would have passed by it, thinking it was a huge rock. Stephen and Liam were forced to leap off the crocodiles when they charged at the turtle. The exterior was made of metal, and they hit hard when they slammed into its shell. The algae scattered over the ground, and the marine creatures ran away. The turtle was enraged. It opened its mouth, and a vortex began to swallow the crocodiles. Stephen transformed the metal slab into a chain and threw it around the turtle's shell. An electrical current sparked along the chain. Some of the electricity flowed into the turtle's internal organs. The pain was insignificant, but it was riled up. Waves loomed over the swamp as the turtle rose to its full height. It was as massive as a mountain. "Cultivators aren't allowed in the swamp. Have you forgotten the agreement we made a few hundred years ago?" Stephen and Liam exchanged a confused glance. They were just here to find a friendly beast to form a blood contract with. The turtle reached out with its aura and was stunned by their weak cultivations. "No wonder you two trespassed. Your cultivations are low, and you're much too young. It's understandable that you're not aware of past events." The turtle transformed into a middle-aged man dressed in a dark green robe. He released a sound wave that swept over the entire swamp. The force slammed into Stephen and Liam like a heavy hammer. The crocodiles scampered out of the water and fled to shore. The man waited for Stephen and Liam to regain their balance. He wasn't in a hurry. He was looking forward to exercising his muscles and limbs. It had been a long time since he'd fought with a cultivator. Liam infused his blade with inner energy, bracing himself for a fight. Before he had a chance to do anything, the soil beneath his feet softened, and he sank into it. When he was knee-deep, the soil hardened, trapping him in the ground. The man vanished and reappeared in front of him. He slammed his fist into Liam's abdomen. Everything had happened so fast that Stephen couldn't get to him in time. Liam took over 100 hits in less than 15 seconds. Stephen caught him before he could crash into the trees. The man flashed in front of them and grabbed the blade of Stephen's sword. Stephen held on to the hilt, but he couldn't do much else. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to classify the man's strength as unfathomable. The longer a beast lived, the more energy they accumulated while hunting, and the stronger they became. The man was completely different from the octopuses and crocodiles. Stephen threw out a wave of crackling lightning. The man deflected it with a slight wave of his free hand. Stephen tugged on the hilt, but the man's grip was unshakable. Moriah had refined his sword recently. If he lost it right before the recruitment began, he wouldn't stand a chance against the other participants. Stephen manifested a phantom of the Killen, and it swirled around the man. Fire and water were opposing attributes. Whichever came out on top depended on which of the two was stronger. Steam rose from the surface of the swamp as waves of heat sizzled against the water. The man condensed the water vapor into a cage and trapped the Killen inside. He held onto Stephen's sword, and his free hand clenched into a fist. He packed a powerful punch, but Stephen was forced to release his hold on the weapon. He grabbed Liam and retreated to the edge of the forest to check on his condition. Fortunately, Liam's injuries were minor. The man casually tossed Stephen's sword onto the soil. He'd seen countless top-grade weapons in his lifetime. This sword was at most a piece of scrap metal. The iridescent dragon appeared and shrank into its size of a leaf. It hid behind the tree trunk and shook its head at Stephen. "You can't blame me. I warned you about the beasts in this realm, but you insisted on coming. That's not your run-of-the-mill beast. It's ancient." "Why didn't you say anything to me when we ran into it? You're a beast too. Can't you talk to him?" "Fine, but you owe me." The iridescent dragon transformed into an opposing young man and landed in the soil. It bent down to pick up Stephen's sword. The divine turtles held a position among the beasts, and it was nowhere near the same level as the dragons. The middle-aged man's expression softened. "I never thought I'd see the day a human cultivator subdues a dragon. What did he do to you? Did he threaten you into forming a blood contract?" "No, we're more like partners. We recently came to the Elysian realm, so we don't know much about the world. We're here to find him out and prepare for the Mystic Covenant's recruitment." The man looked at Stephen and Liam in disdain. "They're going to participate? I might as well kill them here to save them the pain." The man had been hibernating for years. It seemed the outside world had changed drastically in a short amount of time. The Mystic Covenant was a well-known faction across the 6 realms. How could he let these 2 weaklings participate? "Cultivation isn't the only determining factor in surviving the competition," the iridescent dragon said. "They're the Prophet's students. He divined a fraction of their fate." The Prophet took them in as his students? The man was getting more and more confused. As an ancient divine beast, he was on equal footing with the Dragon Clan's prophet. Becoming Liam's mount was out of the question. If you two have invitations to the recruitment, that means you're not completely dead weight. I can't sign a contract with you, but I'll send one of my capable students to assist you. In exchange, my student will absorb the blood of your competitors if they're killed. The divine turtle was one of the most powerful beasts Stephen had ever seen. Its student couldn't be ordinary. A young man who appeared in his 20s leaped out of the swamp. He was also a divine turtle in human form. His most noticeable feature was the cauldron on his back. Stephen and Liam didn't know what it was, but the iridescent dragon recognized it with one look. The cauldron was used to gather blood from stronger beasts in other realms to provide aid during a battle. It was similar to the orcs in the human realm. They could summon beasts from another realm. The cauldron was an upgrade from the orcs' techniques. Is that the demonic blood furnace? The iridescent dragon asked in surprise. You have a good eye, the middle-aged man said. A few centuries ago, we had a disagreement with a group of cultivators over who should keep the cauldron. It ended up in our hands. When ordinary humans offered sacrifices in ancient times, they used animals to express their sincerity. Human cultivators offered beasts, and the beasts returned the favor by offering human cultivators. After the chaotic conflict a few centuries ago, most cultivators acknowledged that the swamp was a dangerous region, and since then, very few people had set foot here. Stephen was concerned that the conflict would break out if the cauldron was used during the competition. Beasts are allowed to participate as mounts, the middle-aged man explained. My student will be participating with the cauldron, but he won't be killing other cultivators for the sake of absorbing their blood. Deaths are unavoidable during the competition, and the bodies are useless once they're dead. My student will only be reaping the benefits. There shouldn't be a problem. The Haven Domain's Silent Priest Temple occupied more than 100 acres of land. It was one of the many properties of the Mystic Covenant. A crowd of spectators was gathered to watch the first round. 3 emissaries from the Mystic Covenant were seated in the main hall. The scent of incense sticks and ringing bells made the atmosphere more solemn. 90% of the participants weren't recommended by city lords. They'll have to participate in the first round, the 3rd emissary said. The 2nd emissary had hosted several recruitments before. She understood the cruelty the participants would have to face more than anyone. Most of them wouldn't be making it out alive. Even if they surrender, it'll be hard for them to make it back to the surface. We're the hosts, the 1st emissary said. Our priority is to select talents for our factions. The minor details are none of our concern. They chose to participate. Whatever happens is on them. The 1st emissary had hosted the gathering in the mansion next to the skylit tower, and he was also in charge of the introductory speech. He stood up and went to the courtyard to announce the start of the first round. After 9,000 participants were gathered, none of them said a word. If they missed even one important detail in the announcement, it would cost them their lives. The Holy Ruins is an ancient battlefield buried underground. We'll teleport you there in a moment. Your task is to survive until the end of the first round. I can't tell you how long it'll last, but to shorten the duration, we, the Mystic Covenant, as the organizer, will set up traps in the ruins. As expected, the introduction wasn't that detailed, but it was better than nothing. The staff handed every participant a life and death contract. The first round would begin in 30 minutes. There was still time to back out. Everyone in the crowd picked up the pens and signed their names without hesitation. There was no reason to wait half an hour. The emissary waved his hand, and the ground turned into quicksand. The participants were pulled underground by the mysterious force. Before the first round began, the threadworms had layered their iron sand over Liam's skin and his uniform. Stephen had mixed his spiritual energy into the sand. If the situation called for it, he could condense his spiritual energy into a companion to fight side by side with Liam. As for the divine turtle in training, it shrunk into a small turtle and hid in Liam's pocket as his mount. A huge lake was in front of the temple. The city lords, their families, and their friends were sitting on the shore, chatting amongst themselves. They were anticipating the first round. The water in the lake turned the color of mercury and reflected a vague image of the holy ruins. The lake had mystical effects. It required each spectator to infuse their spiritual energy into the water for a clearer view. In other words, everyone saw something different. You'll have time to surrender. Think it over carefully before you sign the contract. Stephen looked over to Shaddle, who greeted him with a fake smile. Thank you for your reminder, Mr. Shaddle. Several spectators cast curious glances at Stephen and Vivian. They were eager to discern the truth from the lies about their scandal. Forget about him, Vivian said. Focus on the first round. My family's reputation depends on you. Even if you're not selected, surviving is an achievement. You need your friend to come with you out of this alive. The Holy Ruins was an incomplete floating rock formation. The weapons scattered across the ancient battlefield continuously released a force that supported the earth and suspended it in air. There were unusual flowers and trees growing throughout the strange space. The residual energy and remains of fallen bodies of ancient cultivators provided an endless stream of nutrients for the vegetation. When Liam landed on the ground, he found a deep pit and crawled inside. The sand covering his body synchronized with the surrounding environment. It turned the color of the earth, camouflaging him perfectly. As long as he concealed his aura, it'd be hard for anyone to find him here. An explosion sounded not too far away. Some of the participants had landed close to each other, and a fight had broken out. When expert cultivators fought, they didn't waste time with fancy techniques. Every move contained their full strength and targeted their opponent's vitals. Several participants burned to a crisp, and the victorious party ran into the forest to hide. The first emissary grabbed a small item from his pocket and tossed it into the lake. The ceiling of the rock above the Holy Ruins flashed golden. A large scroll with the word map appeared out of nowhere. A crowd of participants rushed into the air to take the scroll. They attacked each other on the way up. Liam was tempted to get the map, but Stephen told him to stay where he was. Wherever the scroll was within, it shifted to another location. As more participants reached for it, it gradually drifted to the ground where the others were hiding. More participants were lured out of the shadows and joined the fight for the scroll. Another battle broke out. This was the most effective way for the organizers to reduce the number of participants. Waves of energy from the battle swept over the ground, blowing the dirt aside. Skeletons and scattered bones peeked out from the earth. When Liam crawled into the pit, the turtle had increased its size and drilled into the sand nearby. It lowered its breathing and heartbeat to an undetectable frequency. It was much more effective than Liam's method of camouflaging with his environment. The turtle kept its voice low. The purpose of these traps is to weed out the weak. If you keep hiding, the organizers will target you and force you out in the open. Then what should I do? Liam asked. Don't hide and do nothing. Sneak up on the other participants when there's a chance to make the organizers think you're putting in an effort. As the scroll drifted over the Holy Ruins, battles broke out more frequently and intensely. Some of the participants didn't think it was possible to catch the scroll, so they aimed to destroy it, rather than letting it fall into the opponent's hands. But no matter techniques they used, the scroll deflected every attack and changed their course. The participants in hiding were forced to reveal themselves to avoid the explosions. As more and more bodies littered the ground, the turtle infused its energy into the cauldron, and it floated towards the open clearing. The blood drained from the bodies and condensed into rubies. The gems drifted into the cauldron. Its size had shrunk with the turtle, but its capacity remained the same. The cauldron naturally blocked external energy, including the spiritual energy infused into the lake. The audience by the shore on the surface couldn't see the strange phenomenon, but Stephen was witness the entire process through the threadworm's sand. He couldn't figure out what the turtle was up to. Why are you gathering so much blood? Are you planning to summon a beast from another realm and use its energy for yourself? My task is to gather blood from at least 1 million bodies. As for what happens after that, my teacher will handle it. The cauldron floated back to the turtle, and the clearing returned to normal. As the battle in the distance intensified, the scroll used up its power and fluttered to the ground. A surge of participants raced to grab it. When their fingers brushed against the scroll, it burst into flames and turned them to ashes. The scroll wasn't actually a map. The emissary had thrown it into the lake to reduce the number of participants. The participants in hiding were dumbfounded by the petty trick. They resisted the urge to curse out loud to avoid exposing their location. The audience didn't feel the slightest bit of pity. They praised the emissaries for adding entertainment to the competition. None of the participants were that talented. They were looking forward to the second round, where the exempted participants would take the stage. The fallen ancient cultivators had become a pile of bones, but they were reactivated when the participants' blood and energy waves splattered over them. The bones pierced together, and skeletons rose from the dead one after another. They were empty shells without a consciousness. The only instinct they'd retained from when they were alive was to kill. The ruins turned into a slaughterhouse. The participants who considered themselves a tier above the rest took the lead and recruited others in hiding to form teams. The skeletons were a common enemy, and they needed to work together to take them down. Around 4,000 participants stepped forward to fight. Liam stayed in the pit. His cultivation was too low to contribute. As the number of skeletons increased, The participants separated from the fight and searched for others in hiding. When a group of skeletons approached the pit, Liam leaped to the surface and sliced them into pieces with his blade. More than a dozen skeletons collapsed into a pile of bones, but more came up behind them. Liam's blade burned, filling the air with afterimages as he disassembled the skeletons. He didn't need to use too much strength to immobilize them, but the speed at which they pieced back together was just as fast. The turtle shifted into its human form and unleashed a gust of wind to push the skeletons back, putting some distance between them and Liam. Stephen separated a small amount of his spiritual energy from the iron sand and condensed a knife to help fend off the skeletons. While the participants are focused on the skeletons, find somewhere else to hide. The turtle agreed. It had keen senses, and it could feel something moving underground. As if on cue, roots broke through the soil and wrapped around the participants' ankles. They slashed at the roots, but their weapons barely left a scratch. The ends of the roots sharpened and pierced their legs, draining their blood and energy. They released their death group when their bodies shriveled and dried up. The ground caved in, forming a bottomless ravine. More roots shot out and reached for the participants. They'd absorbed an endless supply of blood and energy from the fallen ancient cultivators. They were almost indestructible. The participants abandoned their fight with the skeletons and scattered in all directions. Every plant, creature, and entity in the holy ruins could kill Liam if he wasn't careful. The divine turtle might not give it all its protection to him either. Stephen turned to Vivian for help. If my friend gives up now, how could he come back to the surface? Are you for real? It's been less than a day. I know, but I just feel like things are getting too dangerous for him. Vivian didn't know the answer either. She quietly slipped away from the audience and went up to the emissaries to ask the shameful question. The audience didn't care about what happened to the participants in the first round. Their people were team-based participants, and they'd already moved on to the second round. Most of the participants who weren't exempt were solo players with no backers. Stephen was one of the few with a companion who didn't qualify for the exemption. Vivian came to shore with the information. It's easy to surrender. All your friend needs to do is yell, and the emissaries will hear him. They'll form a simple protective shield around him with the word defeat. The other participants won't be able to attack him, but nothing is stopping the danger in the ruins from killing him off. He won't be able to leave until time is up.